Hello everybody, my name is Melissa Restrepo Rios and with my partners Isabela Acevedo and Ana Sofia Rollave, we are going to present a masterclass based on the case of Miss Rojas. Miss Rojas is a novice teacher working in an urban public bilingual transition school. Her classrooms represents a very common reality in a bilingual education because students have different English proficiency levels at the schools has only moderate technology resources. So, one of the biggest challenges of Ms. Rojas' face is that she depends too much on a textbook, grammar, and syntax instruction. Although she teaches vocabulary and grammatical structures correctly, many students still struggle to communicate naturally in English. This happens because lessons are not always connected to real communication or the CAFR can do descriptors. Today we want to explain how semantics analysis and communicate teaching strategies can help teachers create more meaningful lessons for multi-level classrooms. So we will also show how all students, regardless of their levels, can work toward the same communicate objectives. So first, it's important to understand what the CAFR is and why it is important in a language teaching. The CAFR, or Common European Framework of Reference for Language, focuses on communicate competence. This means that students should learn how to use language in real situations instead of only memorizing grammar rules. For example, according to the CAFR, an A1 student should be able to describe daily routines using simple expressions, and an A2 student should be able to express feelings, preference, and personal experience. The CAFR change the focus of teachings because instead of asking, does the students know this grammar rule? A teacher asks, can the student communicate effectively? This approach is especially important in bilingual classroom because communication helps students develop confidence and interaction skills. When the students use language in authentic context, learning becomes more meaningful and practical. Another important point is that communicate competence include speaking, listening, interaction, vocabulary use, and contextual understanding. Because of this, teachers should design lessons that allow students to participate actively instead of only completely grammar exercise. Now, we are going to explain semantic analysis and why it is important for Ms. Rojas' classroom. So, semantics analysis studies meaning in language and how meaning changes depends on context. Many words in English have multiple meanings and students need contextual understandings to communicate successfully. For example, let's look at the word hot. So, the soup is hot. The sun is hot. Today is hot. Even though the word is the same, the meaning changes in each sentence. If students only memorize vocabulary lists from the textbooks, they may not understand this difference when communicating in the real life, and that is a problem. So, semantics analysis also helps students understand synonyms, shades of meanings, word relationships, and contextual appropriatences. For example, happy, excited, or delighted. These words are similar, but they express different intensities of emotions. Another example is like hungry, obsessed, or furious. Students learn that vocabulary is not about transition. Vocabulary also expresses intention, emotions, and context. This approach helps students improve both comprehension and communication because they understand how language works naturally. Another important concept of Ms. Rojas is differentiate instructions. In her classrooms, students have very different proficiency levels. Some students are beginners while others already have a stronger English skills. Because of this, one single activity should allow different forms of participation. This differentiated instructions means adapting tasks according to a student's abilities while keeping the same communicative goal. For example, in a lesson about daily routines, uh, beginner students can match pictures with vocabulary words. Intermediate students can write simple sentences. Advanced students can compare routines and ask follow-up questions. So all students participate in the same topic, but each student works according to their language level. This strategy creates a more inclusive classrooms because every student can contribute successfully. It also reduces frustration and increase confidence. Increase confidence, especially for beginners. This differentiated instructions is very important in bilingual public schools because classrooms are usually very diverse in terms of language proficiencies and learning pace. So, finally, it is important to remember that language learning should always connect meaning, communication, and interaction. If students only memorize grammar structures, they may pass writing tests but still struggle to communicate in the real life situation. However, when teachers combine semantic analysis with communicate activities, students develop vocabulary, confidence, and interaction skills more naturally. The role of the teacher changes from simple explaining grammar to creating opportunities for communication and participation. In the next section of our masterclass, we will explain practical classroom activities that Ms. Rojas can use to apply these ideas through semantics mapping, role-play activities, contextual meaning exercise, and collaborate storytelling. These activities are aligned with the CAFR conduct descriptors and helps students develop real communicate competence in English.
I'm going to talk about the four activities that we thought Mrs. Rojas could apply in her classroom that could help her students to gather new vocabulary and new structures to use when speaking in English. So, all of this is supported by the CEFR that says can use vocabulary and in simple conversations and in like context. I think it was that. But like in general is to help her students achieve a good level of vocabulary and fluidity when talking with each other. That seems natural. Of course, we don't expect like for the students to become C2 in this activity, no. But that they maybe can gather some new confidence when speaking the language. Okay, so first we thought that could use a semantic mapping of the daily routines. So in the board, the idea is that Ms. Rojas writes daily routines and uses, for example, three aspects. That could be daily routine, school routine, and evening routine. So the idea is that the students, in a way of collaborate, collaborative participation, go to the board and each write, like for example, a sentence for each. For the three aspects of the routines. For example, in morning routine, they could write wake up. In evening routine, they could write watch TV. And in school routine, they could write take notes. So the idea is that after each student has written something different in the board, the activity that would be proposed for Ms. Rojas to do is that she ask for each student to first, like for example, clear any like doubts that they may have, for example, with like vocabulary such as wake up, get up, like what's the difference in meaning that the students can apply it correctly, and also maybe like the difference between have breakfast and eat breakfast, that it's also different and may vary for them. So yes, like this one, um, to clarity, give some clarity to the students. Then, what we would try to do is that the students each write a paragraph, right? So like each student is going to write a paragraph, like a short paragraph for each routine. For example, for the daily routine with the vocabulary that they have in the board, it's for like each of them to think about their own routine. For like, I wake up at 6 a.m. in the morning, then I have X and bread for breakfast, and then I brush my teeth and go to school. You see, like something very simple that the students may interiorize for the use of vocabulary, and that besides the one that is already on the board, they can help themselves with like another vocabulary, for example, like time, vocabulary in food, and also like maybe in clothing and things like that that may help them to this activity. Then we thought that another good idea could be, for example, to a second activity could be um, vocabulary in context. So this is basically that the Miss Rojas is going to give the students two examples. Like for example, the weather is hot and that song is hot. So hot is usually referred to, weather and like, oh, it's warm, it's really high temperatures. So the students may at first like be confused on the second example, and they are going to try to think about how weather is relating to a song. So this is what Ms. Rojas it would try to do with them. So first, it's like to have pictures to help them understand the meaning. In the first one, that of course is related to weather, but in the second one, that for example, hot in this context would mean like trendy or something that is really popular. And so, like the students with the pictures could help themselves to gather this information, and like to, that Miss Rojas doesn't tell them at first, but um, like tell students to try to guess what could hot mean in the second example, and for them to like the pictures and to think through the context what it may hot could mean in this second example. Also, the idea is that, for example, Ms. Rojas adapts the activity to each level of the student. So like for beginners, that they like connect the meanings with like pictures and like to do that correlation. For like in the medium, like in aspects, could be like they match, for example, like meanings with sentences already. And like for maybe advanced students that she has in the classroom, the idea would be that for them to, you know, um, write their own examples and like write a lot of them, and with the use of this new vocabulary and like maybe vocabulary that they may think of. Like this is the idea overall. So like each student could use like the idea of vocabulary in a context, but through each of their levels. Then what we thought could be a third activity, and a good one, is role play. So We thought that could be great if in the classroom Miss Rojas could divide it for the stations. So like restaurant station, supermarket station, and like like things like in the common day, like for example, a coffee shop, um, yes, like a library, some sorts. So this is the like a bookshop, and what we thought that could be great is for like each student to have like a role to play, right? So like for example, of course, Miss Rojas before starting the activity could give them like some vocabulary or like some phrases that the beginner students may use to communicate with others. Also, like for medium students, the idea would be to help them like come up with their but come up with their own phrases, but like also they could help themselves of the ones that Miss Rojas writes in the board. And also but like it would be like structures more like what Miss Rojas would wrote would write. And for like the more advanced students, the idea is for them to, let's say, try to come up with a more natural dialogue that like that it doesn't affect their speech. For example, like if a student's really like really advanced in this and like has a lot of great communicative skills, like that's good, but like the idea is that he doesn't like try to, let's say, target like a more beginner student. Like the idea is for them to share and to try to talk in each other's level. And like that doesn't mean that the advanced student has to like act like an A1 because it isn't. But that maybe could help their friend or like the classmate to try to, like come up with more confidence when speaking the language. And this is like bonding exercise as well as a practice one, in like a real context, like it would be attending a shop. So the idea is for some students to have, I don't know, like the roles of cashiers, one of customers and stuff like that. So like it also like that the each station is like with some material that can help the students, for example in like the supermarket, that the person who is the cashier like maybe like, oh, so you're going to take some Oreos and stuff like that. So like the vocabulary, they are seeing it and interacting with it. So that's the idea for that. And then for our fourth activity, we thought of a collaborative storytelling. So for this for this last activity, we thought that a good idea to do is to, now that the students have practiced a lot their English and that they have a lot of new vocabulary and like a lot of new flying confidence in the language, that, it's like, of course, a process, but like today they really had to use it and come up with it and get comfortable with the language at some point. So the idea is for each one of them to help write a story. So for example, like the Miss Rojas would begin saying like, there's a dog in a big house that's placed in a mountain. So then the other student would say, the dog, it's called Tommy and it's the color red. And like the idea is that each student is going to start adding up to the story, and like then at the end, like the story has, I don't know, has gotten real creative. So like the point is to also incentivize in the students, this sense of creativity and liberty when speaking the language, that they know it's a flexible thing, that they don't have to stick to a script, but that they can play with it and have their fun with it. So yes, that's the four activities that we thought for Mrs. Rojas in the classroom, and that we think could help her students to feel more comfortable with English and to interact with each other and with the language as well, and for them to become better in English, with each, of course, respecting each student's level and comfortability with the language. So yes.
Now, we will focus on teacher reflection and pedagogical adaptation. Reflection is essential because teaching is not only about following a lesson plan. Teachers must constantly evaluate whether students are learning meaningfully. In the case of Mrs. Rojas, after every class of every lesson, she should ask herself questions such as, were students motivated and engaged? Did students understand contextual meaning? Did students communicate meaningfully? Did all students participate? Did activities support the CEFR can do the scriptures? Which students needed more support? Reflection allows teachers to identify strengths and weaknesses in their instruction. For example, in the case of Mrs. Rojas, she may notice that students participate more during role-play activities than during grammar drills. This can help her redesign future lessons to include more communicative interaction. Reflective teacher also encourages flexibility. Teachers learn to adapt lessons according to classroom realities instead of rigidly. In the case of Mrs. Rojas, she works in an urban public bilingual school with moderate technological resources. In her case, she should teach in a practical, flexible, and accessible way. Sometimes teachers believe that they need advanced technology to create communicative classes, and that's not true. Meaningful interaction can happen with very simple resources. Teachers can use flashcards, pair work, dialogues, role play, collaborative discussions, or even classroom objects. For example, students can practice describing objects using real classroom material with pencils, notebooks, phones, backpacks, etc. And it's very important that teachers should teach students with their interests and their realities, because if their students notice that something they are into, it's gonna be easier for the teacher to teach them. But which topics like students? It could be music, sports, social media, school life, friendship, family routines. For example, when a student sees something that they have in their memories, like an experience, it's easier for them to analyze and ask questions about that topic, having in mind their experience. This can create participation and increase the motivation of students. And of course, when students feel emotionally connected to classroom topics, communication becomes more authentic and meaningful. Assessment should also align with communicative teaching principles. Traditionally, language assessment focused mainly on verb conjugation, memorization, and grammar accuracy. However, communicative assessment evaluates whether students can actually use language meaningfully. Teachers can evaluate questions such as, can the student describe routines? Can the students express preferences with disagreements, their hobbies, what they want to be? Can students ask for information, or can students participate in conversation? Can students understand contextual meanings, etc.? Assessment can include role play, pair conversation,
classroom participation, communicative tasks, storytelling, oral presentations, etc. The rubrics that can evaluate these activities should be maybe fluency, vocabulary use, interaction, pronunciation, and communicative effectiveness. And the most important thing you have to know is that mistakes are gonna be there, but mistakes should be viewed as a part of learning rather than failure, because everyone makes mistakes and it's something normal in the human being. So you don't have to worry if your students cannot understand a topic that, for example, for others would be easier, because everyone is different, and in the context of Colombia, more. So having that in mind, you have to understand that the students need opportunities to experiment with language confidently, and of course they are students and they are gonna make mistakes, but it's okay. In conclusion, semantic analysis and communicative teacher strategies can help students, like multi-level students, to achieve the same communicative competences even when they have different proficiency levels. How is this possible? It's possible integrating contextual meaning, the CEFR can do the scriptures, collaborative interactions, semantic relationships, and differentiated instruction. In the case of Mrs. Rojas, if she have in mind the advices that we gave to her, she is capable of transform her classroom into an inclusive, interactive, and meaningful learning environment, because the students will not only memorize, and, for example, memorize grammar rules. No, they will be learn how to interpret the meaning of something, how to express their ideas, their preferences, what they like, what don't like. For example, what are their hobbies, maybe what they are planning for their life, and also how to interact in a more confident way, because this is the most important things that students need, how to be confident in a foreign language, because in our language, in the Spanish language, we can be very confident. Of course, we know the most we have to know about our language, but for example, in English, it's very important that the student feel this connection with the English, and they will be capable to communicate how they feel, like what are they thinking about this idea, or what are they thinking about something that, for example, in their work could be asked by. And the most important thing that students will be learn in this like environment, in the Mrs. Rojas classroom, is how to use English in real life situations, because I think that's the most important thing, how to use a foreign language to communicate to others, and how to defend ourselves. Because if, for example, we go with another country and they talk in this language and we don't know anything about this language, we will be lost. We will be feeling like, oh my god, this is not where I want to be, because I don't know nothing, and I feel like all alone because nobody understands me. And that's why they need to understand how to the Sims defend themselves in real situations, because this is the true goal of language learning, not knowing about the language but being able to communicate with it effectively. And thank you very much for your attention.